I remember standing on the balcony, the weight of my wedding gown pressing gently on my shoulders, the veil tugging softly in the breeze. The desert stretched endlessly before me, golden dunes blending into the horizon under a violet sky. It should have felt like a dream, a simple girl like me, married to an Arab millionaire in a palace people can only imagine in stories. But even as I stood there, something inside me felt uneasy. Ahmed had a way of making everything around him magical. He wasn't just wealthy, he had this presence, this quiet strength that made people either admire him or fear him. From the moment I met him at that conference 6 months ago, my life had turned upside down. He'd walked into that room dressed in a tailored suit, surrounded by people who hung on his every word, but his eyes found mine like no one else mattered. At first, I thought it was a joke. Why would someone like him want to talk to me? I was just Anna, working 2 jobs, living paycheck to paycheck, but Ahmed wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. He didn't flaunt his wealth. His kindness, his genuine curiosity about my dreams made me feel like I wasn't just another face in the crowd. And when he proposed on a quiet night under a sky full of stars, I believed my life was about to become the happiest it had ever been. Now, standing there after the grandest wedding I'd ever seen, surrounded by guests dressed in gold and jewels, I should have been the happiest bride alive, but something wasn't right. Ahmed had disappeared for a while during the reception. A phone call, they said. When he came back, he smiled at me like always, but his eyes, they weren't the same. I didn't say anything. Maybe I didn't want to ruin the moment. The band was playing traditional music, servants carried silver trays of sweet dates and Turkish coffee to the guests. Everything was perfect. Yet even as Ahmed held my hand tightly as though to reassure me, I could feel something slipping away. People were watching me too, some with admiration, others with curiosity, and a few with barely hidden resentment. I overheard whispers, a girl like her marrying someone like him? What could she possibly know about his world? I didn't care what they thought, at least that's what I told myself. But that night I kept looking at him, trying to memorize his face, the slight curl of his lips when he laughed, the crinkle around his eyes when he looked at me, as if I knew deep down that this was too good to last. That night was like a scene from a fairy tale, a palace shimmering in golden light, chandeliers casting delicate patterns on marble floors, and the air filled with the hum of traditional Arabian music. The guests had begun to leave, their voices fading into the cold desert night, but I stayed close to Ahmed, reluctant to let go of the moment. He led me to a private terrace overlooking the vast dunes. His hand was warm in mine, grounding me against the chill in the air. "Anna," he said softly, his voice carrying the weight of something unsaid, "tonight we begin a life that many will envy, but you must promise me one thing, always trust me no matter what." I smiled, brushing off his serious tone as nervous excitement. "You don't have to say things like that, Ahmed. I trust you more than anyone." But he didn't smile back. Instead, he pulled me closer, his dark eyes studying mine as though trying to tell me something words couldn't. Then he kissed my forehead, lingering just long enough to fill me with both warmth and worry. We walked back inside, and for the first time, I noticed how quiet the palace had become. The guests had left, the servants were cleaning up, and a solemn stillness had settled over the space. Ahmed's 2 close advisors stood near the grand staircase, speaking in hushed tones. When they saw him approach, they straightened and fell silent. Ahmed excused himself to speak with them, promising he'd return in a moment. I stood there, feeling awkward and out of place, watching as they exchanged tense whispers. One of the men glanced at me, briefly but with an expression that sent a chill down my spine. Then, as if sensing my unease, Ahmed turned, gave me one of his reassuring smiles, and gestured for me to wait. I told myself not to overthink it, maybe it was just business. Ahmed was a powerful man, and powerful men always had things to deal with, even on their wedding night. But later, as we retired to his private suite, I couldn't shake the tension. The room was luxurious beyond anything I could have imagined, plush carpets, silk curtains, and a view of the desert under the moonlight. Ahmed poured us glasses of wine and toasted to a life of adventure. For a while, everything felt normal again. We talked, laughed, and reminisced about the strange, wonderful way we'd met. He told me stories about his childhood, his business, and how he'd always wanted to find someone who wasn't blinded by wealth but could see the man behind it. That was the Ahmed I knew, the one who made me believe in fairy tales. But even as the night wore on, I couldn't shake the sense that a shadow had crept into our world. Ahmed seemed distracted, glancing at his phone a few too many times, his fingers occasionally tapping nervously against his glass. As we lay in bed, the desert winds howled outside, and Ahmed pulled me close, wrapping me in his warmth. "Whatever happens," he murmured, his voice barely audible, "always remember, I loved you." "Why would you say that?" I asked, half laughing but suddenly uneasy. He just smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from my face. Sometimes we say things because they need to be said, even if we don't want to." I didn't press him further. I told myself it was just the stress of the day, that everything would feel normal in the morning. I didn't know then that those would be the last words he ever said to me. I woke up to silence, the kind of heavy quiet that presses against your chest. The palace was still, but something felt wrong. Ahmed wasn't beside me. His side of the bed was cold, as if he hadn't been there for hours. I sat up, my heart racing, and called out for him. "Ahmed?" There was no answer. I wrapped a shawl around me and stepped out into the hallway, the chill of the marble floor biting at my bare feet. The corridors felt endless, the ornate walls and high ceilings somehow making the space feel lonelier. Finally, I spotted one of the servants, a young man who froze when he saw me. "Madam Anna," he said nervously, avoiding my gaze, "you should return to your room." "Where's Ahmed?" I demanded, my voice trembling. His hesitation was enough to send a wave of panic through me. Without waiting for an answer, I turned and ran. I don't know how I knew where to go. It was like something was pulling me, guiding my feet to his private study. When I reached the door, it was slightly ajar. My breath hitched as I pushed it open. The sight before me is something I'll never forget, no matter how much I want to. Ahmed was there, slumped over his desk, his head resting on his arms as if he'd fallen asleep, but the glass of wine beside him was spilled, staining the rich wood surface, and the soft glow of the lamp cast eerie shadows over his still figure. I rushed to him, shaking his shoulder. "Ahmed, wake up." But he didn't move. His skin was cold to the touch, his usual warmth gone. The realization hit me like a punch to the stomach. He wasn't breathing. "Help!" I screamed, my voice echoing through the empty halls. Within moments, people flooded the room, guards, advisors, even a doctor who had been among the wedding guests. They tried to pull me back, but I wouldn't let go of him. The doctor checked for a pulse, his face pale as he shook his head. "He's gone," he said quietly, as though those words could somehow lessen their impact. Gone. The word didn't make sense. Ahmed couldn't be gone. He was supposed to be here with me. He'd just promised me a life of adventure. The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of grief and confusion. The palace was in chaos, with police and private security swarming every corner. I sat in our bedroom, trembling as questions flooded my mind. How could this have happened? Ahmed had seemed healthy, strong, vibrant. He wasn't the kind of man who would just die. The first theory was natural causes. Perhaps a heart attack, someone suggested. But when the doctor examined him further, his expression darkened. "This is no heart attack. We'll need an autopsy to confirm." That's when the whispers started. Poison. Assassination. I overheard the guards murmuring about Ahmed's rivals, powerful men in the business world who envied him, even hated him. One of his advisors insisted he knew this day would come. He had too many enemies. And then the gaze of suspicion turned to me. It was subtle at first, lingering stares, cautious tones when people addressed me, but it grew. A detective dressed impeccably in a suit entered the room where I was sitting. "Madam Anna," he began, his voice calm but firm, "we'll need to ask you a few questions." Questions? I repeated, my voice cracking. You think I had something to do with this? His expression was unreadable. It's routine. A man of Mr. Al-Saler's stature doesn't pass away under such circumstances without a thorough investigation. I felt the walls closing in around me. The woman who had just become Ahmed's bride was now being treated like a suspect in his death, and deep down, the question that haunted me more than any accusation was the one I couldn't answer: who did this and why? The autopsy report came back 2 days later, confirming the fears whispered behind closed doors. Ahmed had been poisoned. The substance was rare, nearly undetectable, and lethal within hours. Whoever had done this knew what they were doing. By then, I had become the center of the investigation. The police, the staff, even Ahmed's advisors seemed to believe that the grieving widow was just too convenient a suspect. A quick rise to wealth, one of them murmured within earshot. Who benefits the most from his death? I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat. Everywhere I turned, there were questions I couldn't answer and people who didn't trust me. Yet, in the darkest moments, one thought drove me forward. I had to find out who killed Ahmed. I owed him that much. Ahmed's closest advisor, Farouk, reluctantly agreed to help me dig into his past. You might not want to know what you're asking for, he warned. Ahmed wasn't just a businessman, he had enemies, dangerous ones. Together, we unearthed secrets Ahmed had hidden from even me. Business rivalries that extended beyond boardrooms and into dangerous territories. A deal that had fallen apart just weeks before our wedding, leaving one of his former partners furious and vengeful, and perhaps most chilling, an anonymous threat sent to his private email just days before our wedding. You think you've escaped us? You haven't? The pieces began to form a picture, one of betrayal, power struggles, and greed, yet the question remained. Who among Ahmed's many enemies had the means and the opportunity to kill him? That's when I found it, a note hidden in a drawer in his study. It wasn't addressed to anyone, but the words hit me like a blow. If anything happens to me, trust no one. Start with Farouk. The weight of Ahmed's warning threatened to crush me. Farouk, the man who had seemed so loyal, the one who had promised to help, might have been the very person behind his murder, but I couldn't confront him directly, not yet. If he was involved, accusing him without proof could put me in danger too. In the days that followed, I started noticing things I hadn't before. Farouk's nervous behavior, the way he deflected questions about Ahmed's business, his insistence that I let the investigators handle everything. I began to quietly gather information on my own. Meanwhile, the whispers about me grew louder. Journalists camped outside the palace, publishing stories about the gold digger bride and her suspicious role in Ahmed's death. Strangers online accused me of everything from marrying for money to plotting his murder. But none of that mattered. What mattered was Ahmed and the promise I had made to him on our wedding night. I trust you. One night, while everyone else was asleep, I sneaked into Ahmed's private office. Using his fingerprint, a precaution he'd set up for me, I unlocked his hidden safe. Inside was a stack of documents neatly organized but clearly meant to stay hidden. Among them were bank statements, property deeds, and letters that revealed the full extent of his dealings with Farouk. Farouk had been siphoning money from Ahmed's accounts for years, laundering it through dummy companies. Ahmed must have found out before the wedding and kept quiet to avoid scandal. The pieces clicked into place. Farouk had the motive, and as Ahmed's most trusted confidant, he'd had the opportunity too. The next morning, I presented everything to the authorities. I thought it would be the end, but Farouk wasn't going down without a fight. "You don't know what you're doing," he hissed when the police came to arrest him. "You think this will stop it? You have no idea what's coming." His words chilled me, but as they dragged him away, I felt a flicker of hope for the first time since Ahmed's death. Maybe the truth would come out. Maybe I could finally grieve in peace. But the shadow Farouk spoke of, it wasn't gone, it was just beginning. With Farouk in custody, I thought it was over, but the relief I felt was short-lived. A week later, I received an anonymous message, a video sent to my phone in the dead of night. The footage showed Ahmed at a meeting, seated across from a group of stern-looking men whose faces were partially obscured by shadows. They spoke in Arabic, their tones cold and deliberate. I couldn't understand all of it, but one word stood out: revenge. At the end of the video, a voice I didn't recognize whispered in English, "Farouk was only a pawn. The real game has just begun." My blood turned cold. Farouk wasn't the mastermind. He was merely one piece in a much larger conspiracy. I realized then that Ahmed's death wasn't just a personal attack. It was part of a deeper, more sinister plot that Ahmed had never revealed to me. Fearing for my life, I turned the video over to the authorities, but their investigation moved at a frustratingly slow pace. In the meantime, I hired a private investigator, a former intelligence officer named Daniel, to help me uncover the truth. Daniel pieced together fragments of Ahmed's dealings from emails, phone records, and old surveillance footage. Slowly, a new picture began to emerge. Ahmed had been working on a project that threatened powerful criminal networks, a clean energy initiative that would disrupt the oil industry. His business meetings often included tense negotiations with men who had ties to organized crime. And most disturbingly, there were records of secret payments to an unnamed party shortly before his death, payments that had stopped abruptly the day he was poisoned. It became clear Ahmed hadn't just been killed for personal reasons. His vision for the future had made him enemies far more dangerous than I ever imagined. The more we uncovered, the more dangerous things became. My phone calls were tapped. Strange cars lingered outside the palace gates, and then the threats started. At first they were subtle. Notes slipped under my door, warning me to stay quiet or leave things alone, but one night I found a bullet placed on my pillow. That was the moment I knew I couldn't stay at the palace any longer. Daniel arranged for me to move to a safe house in an undisclosed location. There, we continued piecing together the puzzle. The video had given us our first lead, and through Daniel's connections, we were able to trace the meeting to a secluded compound in Dubai. But there was a catch. The people involved were powerful enough to manipulate authorities, erase evidence, and silence witnesses. If I wanted justice for Ahmed, I'd have to take matters into my own hands. "Are you sure about this?" Daniel asked one night as we prepared to leave for Dubai. "Once you step into their world, there's no turning back." "I don't have a choice," I said, my voice firm despite the fear simmering inside me. "Ahmed trusted me to fight for him, and I will." Arriving in Dubai, the weight of what I was about to do hit me like a tidal wave. I wasn't just walking into a dangerous world, I was stepping into Ahmed's past, a part of his life he had worked so hard to shield me from. Daniel and I tracked the compound to a private estate owned by a shell company. Gaining access wasn't easy, but with the help of forged identities and a well-placed bribe, we managed to infiltrate the outer circle of the group involved. What I found inside was beyond anything I had imagined. A secret organization operating at the crossroads of crime, politics, and industry. They called themselves the Alliance, and Ahmed's project had threatened billions in profits. Through careful observation and conversations with insiders, I pieced together the truth. Ahmed's death had been ordered by the Alliance after he refused to abandon his clean energy project. Farouk had been coerced into cooperating but wasn't the real mastermind. The true leader of the Alliance was a man Ahmed had once called a friend, someone I had met briefly at our wedding, his face a blur in my memories. The final blow came when I was confronted by this man, Kamal. He smiled as though we were old acquaintances, his tone calm but menacing. "You've come far, Anna," he said, leaning closer, "but this game isn't for amateurs. Go back to your safe little world and I'll let you live. Keep digging and you'll end up like Ahmed." I felt my anger boil over. "You think you can scare me? You think killing him means you've won? Ahmed believed in something bigger than all of us, and I'm not going to let you bury his dream." Kamal's smile faltered for a brief second before he regained his composure. "Then I guess you leave me no choice," he said, signaling to his men. What happened next is still a blur. An ambush, gunfire, and a desperate escape. Daniel and I barely made it out alive, but we left with something precious: documents proving the alliance's involvement in Ahmed's murder. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time I felt a glimmer of hope. Ahmed's killers might be powerful, but now I had something they couldn't erase: the truth.